time here. We actually have a brand new feed coming into Live Impact News Studio from California, where the Attorney General there is speaking on a suit that has just been issued against the Trump administration. This is regarding the president's mobilization of the California National Guard to respond to protests from over the weekend in the Los Angeles area. So let's listen right now. This is, once again, California Attorney General Rob Bonta speaking.
And asking the court to set aside the president's unlawful action federalizing the California National Guard. With this order, Trump and Hegseth ignored law enforcement's expertise and guidance and trampled over our state's, California's, sovereignty. They unlawfully...
Quick point here, folks, as we work to correct some of the audio issues. It sounds like we might have been getting multiple feeds out of that one feed as far as audio is concerned. We'll just recap the situation since it's been pretty contentious here since over the weekend. 56 people arrested over the weekend as folks were protesting federal immigration raids. We know that folks in some portions of these protests actually spilled onto the freeway in the area, causing it to shut down, and then around 300 National Guard members were deployed. California Governor Gavin Newsom says that this is not within the president's purview to order such, but the president thinks so. So let's listen once again. This is the Attorney General there in California.
Movement of the mail through the U.S. Postal Service was down. It was not happening. The laws could not be executed without the federal government calling in the National Guard. That's an example of the only other time ever that this law was used to invoke the calling in of the National Guard by the federal government. This is a law that requires the governor's consent to activate the National Guard. This is the first time since 1965 that a president has activated the National Guard without a request from the state's governor, and the governor of California knows how to call in the National Guard if and when it's needed. He did it with the LA fires. He did it in the summer of 2020 with some of the protests in California. So this is something that is within Governor Newsom's sovereignty, and he did not authorize the use of the National Guard here, did not call for it. Yesterday afternoon, Governor Newsom actually sent a letter to Mr. Hegseth requesting that the secretary rescind the unlawful deployment of troops and return them to the governor's command. The request was ignored. We don't take lightly to the president abusing his authority and unlawfully mobilizing California National Guard troops. Service members who work hard day and night to protect our state. They're tackling fentanyl at the border. They're tackling wildfires and preparing for the next one. They train and they prepare so they're ready if they're called to war. They work to keep our border secure. Prevent fentanyl from infiltrating our neighborhoods, poisoning our people, and killing our communities. They stand ready to move in at a moment's notice to respond to a natural disaster. Activating these troops for protests that local law enforcement had confirmed at the time were under control is deeply unfair and disrespectful of their service and sacrifice. It pulls them away from critical work that needs and requires their immediate attention. If the situation had necessitated support from the National Guard at the time, Governor Newsom would have swiftly deployed them. Something he's already done during his time in office, again, including as recently as this January, a few months ago, when he called service members to help respond to the wildfires in Southern California. National Guard weren't needed in LA yesterday, and sending them in only escalated the situation and contributed to the developments we saw overnight. I was in communication with local law enforcement this weekend, who confirmed that they had what they needed to control the protests in Paramount. If local law enforcement did decide they needed further support, the first rational step would be to call upon other nearby agencies, call in mutual aid through strong strategic protocols we have in place in the state already. There's a progression here. If you can handle it internally, the situation on the ground, which over the weekend, the LA Sheriff's Department and LA Police Department were fully capable of, then you do so. If you need additional support, you call for mutual aid. They didn't need any mutual aid over the weekend. California local law enforcement, over the weekend before the president issued the order calling in the National Guard. California local law enforcement are prepared They're trained and they're resourced to handle situations exactly like this. This is what they do. They know how to do their jobs and know when to call in backup, including the National Guard, when, if it is necessary, when, if it is fit to do so. That was not the case on Sunday. Trump and Hegseth jumped from 0 to 60, bypassing law enforcement expertise and evaluation. They threw caution to the wind and sidelined strategy in an unnecessary and inflammatory escalation that only further spurred unrest. Let's be very clear, there was no risk of rebellion, no threat of foreign invasion, no inability for the federal government to enforce federal laws. It's no accident that the right to peaceful protest is in the First Amendment. It's because peaceful protest is a cornerstone of any healthy democracy. The ability to come together in community, call out injustice, speak truth to power, and demand accountability from those in power defines who we are as Americans, defines our history, defines what we stand for as a nation of the people, by the people, for the people. To silence the people is to smother our democracy. To any who are outraged with the conduct of President Trump and his administration who feel moved to stand up and speak out, I urge you to do so peacefully, safely, and lawfully. To any opportunists who see peaceful protests as their moment to create chaos, know that local law enforcement are on the ground, ready to take action in order to protect public safety and protect the right to peaceful protest. Thank you. And before I turn it over to questions, I want to acknowledge the incredible, tireless work done by my team at DOJ, who were ready and willing to work through the weekend and through the night on this lawsuit. Brendan Hammy, Kendall Mickle, Thwaite, Megan Richards, Lorraine Lopez, Luke Friedman, Nicholas Espiritu, Marissa Malouf, Robin Goldfaden, James Stanley, Laura Fair, Nick Green, Christina Bull-Arndt, and Jacqueline Gonzalez. Thank you. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions.
If you would like to ask a question, you may do so by clicking on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. You will then be moved to the queue. Please wait until I call on you to speak and state your publication. You may also use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask your question. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, you may do so by clicking on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. Again, please make sure you state your publication when asking your question. First question comes from Monica. Monica, you are now unmuted. Monica Madden.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Oh,
Hi.
Hi there. Hi there, Monica Madden with ABC 7 News in the Bay Area. President Donald Trump says that he's open to arresting Governor Gavin Newsom if the federal government sees the governor as violating or impeding with ICE efforts. I mean, this would be unprecedented, but is this something that the Trump administration legally could do in your eyes? And just any reaction to that?
I don't see it. It's just more talk, more bluff, more bluster. More threats. It's what they do. It's what they say. Mr. Homan has said similar things. So has Mr. Trump. States have rights. States can do lawful things. The Trump administration has shown at least 23 times with respect to California the willingness to be a repeat offender and violate the Constitution, violate the law. It is the president and the Trump administration that is consistently and frequently, blatantly and brazenly violating the law, not Governor Newsom. So it's seems to be more a bluster and threat. And look, this is what the Trump administration does. They threaten law firms. They call judges, so-called judges, and call for impeachment and question their authority to reduce their credibility. They kick the press, the free press, out of White House briefings. With fear, they seek to gain compliance, and that's not happening in California. We're just going to stand up for our rights. We're going to stand up for our freedoms. We're going to stand up for the rule of law. We're going to defend our democracy. We're going to defend the Constitution. Everything Governor Newsom has done and is doing is completely lawful in the best interest of California, supporting California, California's people, our future, our financial resources lawfully. And it is the president that needs to put a mirror up to himself and realize that the unlawful actor here is him and his administration, not Governor Newsom.
Thank you. And has this lawsuit been filed yet, or are you planning to file it today?
We're on the verge of filing it. It is not currently on file. It will be on file by early this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Jose. You are now unmuted.
Hi there. AG, your office and other state AGs are fighting the White House's attempt to rewrite the Constitution by eliminating birthright citizenship. And we've also seen nonprofit groups fighting the administration, ignoring judicial orders when it sends people to El Salvador. My question is, does this current fight have the makings of yet another constitutional crisis? And can you give us your read on the state of our democracy when we've got the president mobilizing troops already this way?
I definitely think we're in a crisis. I think whether it's a constitutional crisis is in the eye of the beholder, and people have different definitions about what constitutes a constitutional crisis. I have my own, which is if and when there's a clear, understandable, readily digestible, and easily followable U.S. Supreme Court order by the U.S. Supreme Court requiring the president to take certain actions. The president acknowledges understanding and receipt of that order and says, I'm not going to follow it. Then we're in a constitutional crisis. That's my view. We're not there yet. To me, that hasn't happened. There's a progression of steps along the way. Once a court issues an order to make sure that that order has the power and force and authority that it deserves and requires under our democracy. We've used one tool, which is a motion to enforce the order if we believe it's not being followed in the way that it should be in all its breadth and scope and nuances. We've brought those in our cases and we've won, and the federal government has followed and followed the order and complied with the order. There's civil contempt that can be brought. There's criminal contempt that can be brought before and on the way to any potential constitutional crisis. We have not had anyone held in contempt yet. So in my view, until a member of the federal government is held in prison for contempt of court for not following a clear court order, we're not yet at a constitutional crisis. So that's my definition. Other people have different definitions. I respect those definitions as well, and think that they're reasonable and thoughtful. I just have my own view, and that's what it is. Whether having National Guard troops on the ground in LA means we're at a constitutional crisis, or it's certainly an unnecessary escalation. It stokes the flames. It's inflammatory and provocative and unnecessary and unhelpful and counterproductive. So, and we're doing what we're supposed to do. We are not supposed to have, and it is not normal, nor is it acceptable to have a president who violates the law so blatantly and frequently. But should that be his course, a repeat offender of unlawfulness, then our response, California, Democratic attorneys general who want to fight for rights and freedoms, the rule of law and democracy, is to take him to court and haul him into court and hold him accountable and secure the court order that we deserve by presenting facts and the applicable law to secure that court order. So we're doing exactly what we should be doing, going to court. The president is not doing what he should be doing by violating the law yet again. This is our 24th lawsuit in 19 weeks. But if that's his course, then our response is to take him to court again. And we will take him to court every time he breaks the law, violates the Constitution, and hurts Californians. We're doing so again today.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Evan. Evan, you are now unmuted.
Hi, Attorney General. This is Evan McMorris Santoro with Notice. You're wearing kind of two hats in this situation, both as a person filing a lawsuit and also as a law enforcement officer in California. And my question is kind of about those two things. One, you mentioned that this hasn't been done very often, and I wonder if this is a kind of a novel case that you're filing. Have courts weighed in that much on when the president is able to use this power that is sort of delineated, but maybe not used that often? And the second one is, it does seem that some of this unrest is still going on. Are you saying now that sort of given this action that whatever's happening now is kind of on the president for fomenting things and exacerbating things by issuing this deployment?
Let me answer the second question first. Over the weekend, throughout the evening on Saturday and into the late hours of Saturday evening, LAPD had made it clear that everything was calm in the city of LA. I believe there were 20 peaceful protesters at the time I got the latest information on Saturday. And then LA County had an ongoing issue in Paramount. Issues flare up all the time. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department is the largest sheriff's department in the nation. By the way, the LA Police Department is the third largest in the nation. These are some of the biggest law enforcement agencies in the nation. They're fully resourced. They have highly trained law enforcement officers ready and trained and prepared for any situation. And so a example of civil unrest, protests that includes violence, is something that they're very prepared to handle. And the LA sheriff, through his own resources, without reaching out to any other agency, through mutual aid, was able to handle the issue in Paramount. Another issue flared up in Compton that night. CHP was already called to assist, and together CHP and LA sheriffs handled that issue, and things were quiet by the time the first National Guards people arrived in LA. They were quiet. Since then, they have not been quiet. So I'll let you conclude whether the National Guardsmen that were called unnecessarily and unlawfully by the Trump administration contributed to, caused, stoked the flames, inflamed, increased tensions, provoked. I think what I just laid out makes it clear. And with respect to the novelty, a potential novelty of this question, this section of the law that the Trump administration relies on, 10 USC 12406, has only been invoked once in our history, 55 years ago, during a shutdown because of a strike of the U.S. Postal Service. That was, the invocation presumably was under the section that says that the president is unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States, meaning there's laws of the United States creating a U.S. Postal Service, requiring the U.S. mail to be moved by the U.S. Postal Service. It was shut down, so the National Guard was brought in to move the mail. That's the only time this has ever been used. It wasn't used for other similar and even worse situations of civil unrest or protests that included violence. And so it is a rarely used and invoked section of the law, but the language is clear in the law. One, you need to have a rebellion. There's no rebellion. One, you need to have an invasion, or two, you need to have an invasion. There's no invasion. Three, you need to be unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. Local law enforcement had all issues under control with their existing resources. Didn't even have to go to mutual aid. And the governor's agreement and consent needs to be part of any calling in of the National Guard. So that didn't happen, and thus, on its face, this action by the federal government to federalize the National Guard is unlawful. But you are right that this is not a section of the law that's been subject to multiple opinions and has a lot of case law on it. It's been rarely used for good reason, because the conditions set forth that triggers its use are rare and infrequent and do not exist here.
Thank you. Next question comes from Eton. You are now unmuted.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Attorney General and team. It's Eton Wallace from the state capitol here. Thanks for doing this with the Next Star stations across the state. Two quick questions here, and you know how it is on TV. I only have so much time to really explain what the goal of the lawsuit is. So just to be crystal clear, the goal of the lawsuit is to rescind the president's order deploying the National Guard to Los Angeles. And the second question is, are you confident you can win?
On the first question, you're correct. The goal of the lawsuit is to secure a declaration from the court that the Trump order federalizing the National Guard and deploying them to Los Angeles was unlawful. We will also seek injunctive relief and a restraining order at the appropriate time. And yes, we think we will win. We only bring cases we believe we will win based on the law and the facts and our analysis. We wouldn't bring this one if we weren't confident of our success. We think that the conditions required to invoke the statute here, 10 U.S.C. 12406, were absolutely not present, and thus the Trump administration's reliance on that section of the law was inappropriate.
Next question comes from Cameron. You are now unmuted.
Hi there, Attorney General. Was curious about, you've condemned some of the more violent acts that we're seeing at night in regards to these protests. Has there been any indication that these are coming from a specific organized group? Are these randomized? And regardless, what is your message to these people who, are kind of indulging some of this chaos?
Unfortunately, this is a scenario that we see when there are peaceful protests, and everyday people speak up and speak out peacefully against an injustice, against a wrong, against something that they don't agree with, which is a core fundamental right in the United States of
All right, sorry, folks. We got a little bit crossed here with some of our feeds coming into the Live Impact News studios. You saw briefly there, we quickly pivoted from this Attorney General press conference out of California announcing that suit against the Trump administration for mobilization of the California National Guard to respond to the protests over the weekend on federal immigration actions. And we saw briefly a look at the big board, Dow Jones. If you're curious, it looks like we're up about 100 points on the day. With